Hello and welcome to the Lectionary preview at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Venice, Florida. And this week we're previewing the new year. Yes, this is the first week of the new church year. So we are going to go to the season of Advent, which is starting this weekend. And we're also moving from year C to year A. Now, what does that mean? Well, year C is the year where we look at Luke for most of our gospel readings. So we're moving from Luke to Matthew. Mark gets year B. And maybe you've got the question, well, what happened to John? Well, John doesn't get his own year, but we get readings from John in all 3 years, so A, B, and C. So starting off a new year in Matthew. So one would think that we would have a nice, simple reading from Matthew that's not giving us a lot of conflict, but we do get a conflict reading here in Matthew. We're starting to learn about what Jesus is going to tell us about the end of the age, the end of the world. And it seems to be an interesting place to start as we're starting the Advent season where we're anticipating the birth of Jesus. But in some ways, I think this is very appropriate to take a look at the end as we start to celebrate the incarnation and the beginning in the next few weeks. So what does Jesus tell us about in Matthew? Well, Jesus tells us to be ready in Matthew. He tells us that the end will come at a time when no one knows. He also tells us that there will be situations where two people are doing something. In the example, he uses grinding grain or doing work in the farm, and one will be taken and the other one will be left. Now, perhaps you have heard things in our Christian culture here in the West about this idea of the rapture. So in the idea of the rapture, which is not in the Bible, just to let you know, before the end of the earth, people are going to be taken and whisked away. And those people that are taken are the ones who have been the good Christians, and the not so good Christians are going to be left behind. But that's not what's said here in Matthew. You see, Jesus doesn't say who is the good one when they are taken away or who is the bad one that is left behind. Actually, it says something kind of the opposite, because Jesus talks about Noah, and in the days of Noah, who was swept away? Well, it was the people that were not part of the mission of God in Noah and the ark. The people that stayed were the ones who got on the ark. So I just think it is important for us to keep this in mind as we try and make some judgment on this verse, which may not be there. What does Jesus tell us to do? Jesus tells us to be ready. Now, I think this is something that's very reassuring. Since we don't know what time the end of the world is going to show up, we're just going to be ready. We're just going to continue to follow Jesus. We're going to continue to be Jesus's disciples as we live our lives in the kingdom of God. But living life in the kingdom of God is certainly not easy. And to see an example of someone trying to give us some courage as we try to live our lives in this kingdom of God in these uncertain times, we turn to the book of Romans and the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul is using some metaphors to talk about what it means to live as a follower of Christ in these times. One of the metaphors he uses is light and dark. So be children of the light, follow the ways of the light, do not follow the ways of darkness. So Paul goes on to give some examples about what happens in darkness. And sometimes it may seem like the idea that perhaps your parents or grandparents said that, nothing good happens after midnight. That is a little bit of what Paul's telling us here, is that some of the things that happen at night where we don't think anyone's watching, well, those are things that are not in concert with the kingdom of God. So what should we do in this case? Well, Paul uses another metaphor to talk about putting on the armor of light, the armor of Christ, the clothing. He uses the clothing metaphor a lot, to put on Christ, to immerse ourselves in following Jesus. And he says that will help us work our lives as we are still subject to the powers of, the word he uses is flesh. Now, Paul is not saying that bodies are bad and spirit is good. What Paul is talking about is his idea of the flesh could be understood as our tendency towards sin. In other words, it's the part of our lives, the part of our beings that is still controlled by sin. And Paul says the way to work against that is to put on the light and love of Jesus. So that is what we can do to work in this kingdom of God. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is what we see in Isaiah. Isaiah, our Old Testament lesson from today, has a bit of a dream poetry. You see, Isaiah is giving the people God's dream for what they can be. It sounds a little bit like, the Martin Luther King dream speech, is that things are not great right now, but we have a dream for what things can be. And some of the things that are in this dream is rather than having war, in this future, in this beautiful future where God's in charge, God's going to arbitrate between people that have problems. God's going to be the one who decides between nations and provides justice. And because so much justice is going to happen and so much peace is going to be around, there's going to be no need for weapons of war. Things that create conflict are not going to be needed anymore. So much so that they will be converted from spears and swords into plowshares and pruning hooks. They're going to be converted into things that help people, that create food. And that is the dream of our end. That is the dream of what God's going to do on this world in the end. And we, as Christians, can help follow that and do our best to to convert our own swords, whatever they might be, into plowshares, into things that will help provide for each other. So this is a short look at what the Bible has in store for us this weekend. I hope that you come and join us on Saturday or Sunday. And remember, our times are changing this week, so come on Saturday at 8:30 and 10:45 are our services. Thank you.